What are you doing to my son? Dominic Hale stood in the doorway, his voice tight and sharp, the kind of voice that comes out before the mind even catches up. He wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. His entire focus was locked on the one thing he never expected to see in his own home. Noelle Carter, the quiet maid who usually kept her head down and stayed out of the way, was sitting in the rocking chair with his infant son pressed against her chest. She wasn't just holding him. She was breastfeeding him. Liam's small fingers rested against her skin, his eyes closed. His body finally relaxed in a way Dominic hadn't seen in days. Noelle's blouse was partly unbuttoned, and her voice was barely above a whisper as she hummed a soft tune, unaware that the world around her was about to collapse. When she heard his voice, her eyes opened instantly. The calm in her face vanished, replaced by shock and fear as her body stiffened around the baby. "Mr. Hale, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Let me explain." But Dominic stepped deeper into the room, his expression tightening. Anger mixed with confusion sat heavy on his face. He looked like a man trying to understand something that made no sense to him. "Explain why my maid is feeding my son with her own body," he asked, each word heavy, controlled, and edged with disbelief. He wasn't yelling yet. He didn't need to. The rage was in his eyes. Noelle held Liam closer as she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "He wouldn't eat," she said. "He kept rejecting the formula. He was getting weaker, Mr. Hale. He was starting to go still. I used to work in the NICU. I still produce milk. He latched because he needed it." Her explanation was quiet, gentle, almost pleading, but Dominic shook his head slowly, as if her words were touching something inside him he didn't want touched. "You had no right," he said. "You don't touch my child. You don't make decisions for my family." Noelle rose to her feet with Liam still in her arms. She didn't run. She didn't shrink. If anything, her posture straightened. "Mr. Hale," she said, her tone calm but firm, "your son was shutting down. I saw it yesterday. I saw it again this morning. He was fading. I acted because I had to." Her words were simple, grounded, and painfully honest, and that honesty only pushed Dominic further into the corner he didn't know how to escape. "You crossed a line," he said, his voice dropping lower. "You crossed my line." And then, without warning, the slap came. A sharp, open-handed blow across her face that echoed through the nursery. Noelle stumbled, her body turning just enough to shield Liam from the force pulling her off balance. She touched her cheek, stunned, but she didn't fall. She didn't scream or cry. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady and full of hurt that went deeper than the impact. "I saved your son," she said quietly. "I didn't try to take your place. I acted because he needed someone to act." Dominic's breathing slowed, then faltered, his anger slipping into something he didn't want to name. His hand dropped to his side as if he only just realized what he had done. "I don't need saving from someone like you," he muttered, but there was no strength behind the words. "Someone like me," Noelle repeated, softer this time. "You mean a black woman? A maid? Someone you think is beneath you?" Dominic's face shifted, a small flinch he couldn't hide. Noelle didn't wait for an answer. She stepped past him and moved to the crib, placing Liam gently on the soft blanket. She touched the baby's cheek once, tenderly, the way only someone who truly cared would. Then she turned back to Dominic, her cheeks still burning, her eyes full of pain and clarity. "You hit the only person who kept your son alive," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply the truth. She walked out of the room, one hand on her cheek, the other wiping a tear she refused to let fall. Dominic didn't stop her. He didn't speak. He just stood there, breathing hard, staring at his son in the crib, and realizing for the first time that he didn't know who Noelle Carter really was, and that he didn't know how close his son had come to danger until she stepped in. Before we continue, take a moment to breathe. Stories like this one touch deep places in the heart, and if you're still here, it means you want to see where the truth leads. If you're following along and you want more stories told with honesty, emotion, and real human depth, make sure you subscribe. It helps this channel grow, and it tells me you want more stories like this one. And if anything in this opening hit you in the chest, Drop a comment and tell me you're here. Now let's continue. She didn't look back as she stepped out of the penthouse. The elevator doors closed slowly, almost painfully, as if even the building itself felt the weight pressing down on her chest. Noelle kept one hand on her cheek the entire ride down, feeling the warmth of the swelling, feeling the sting, feeling the shame. But more than anything, she felt the ache in her heart, the same deep hollow ache she thought she had buried months ago. When she finally reached the street, the cold air rushed against her face, but she barely felt it. Her legs carried her forward out of habit, not intention. She walked the long Brooklyn block back to her tiny apartment without really seeing the world around her. Noise. Cars. People. Everything blurred. The only thing she could see clearly was Liam's small face resting against her chest, the way he had relaxed for the first time in days. The way his breathing steadied. The way he trusted her without knowing anything about her life. The moment she reached her apartment door, she paused. Her hands were shaking. She tried the key, missed the lock, tried again, then finally pushed the door open and stepped into the quiet space she called home. It wasn't much. A small couch. A cheap table. A single photo frame on the wall. The only picture she had of Elijah. Her son. The little boy she couldn't save. She sank into the couch, pressed both hands against her face, and let the silence wrap around her like a heavy blanket. Her heart was beating fast, too fast, as if she had run miles. She tried to steady her breathing, but her emotions kept rising and falling like waves in a storm. She had been hit before. Life had hit her harder than this, but being slapped by Dominic wasn't what hurt the most. What cut deepest was that he looked at her like she was nothing. Like she was a threat. Like the way she saved his son had made her unworthy instead of necessary. She leaned back and closed her eyes, letting her thoughts drift to Elijah. His tiny fingers. His tired little breaths. The way she held him through the night as the infection took over, knowing the whole time she was losing him, but unable to let go. She remembered the doctor's voice, soft but final. She remembered his blanket, still folded neatly in her closet. She remembered the way she used to hum to him, almost the same tone she used with Liam. Maybe that was why it felt impossible to ignore Liam's cries at the Hale penthouse. Maybe that was why she moved without thinking. Maybe some part of her recognized the same danger signs all over again. She wiped another tear away. Too many tears lately. Too many nights trying to understand why life kept circling back to pain. She didn't plan to work as a maid. She was trained. She had years of NICU experience. But after Elijah died, everything inside her collapsed. She couldn't step inside a hospital again. The smallest beeping monitor made her chest tighten. The smell of disinfectant brought back memories she wasn't ready to face. So she left. Packed her things. Took whatever job she could handle. Ended up cleaning apartments and penthouses for families she barely knew. The Hale job paid more, so she accepted it. But what pulled her in wasn't the salary. It was Liam. Something about the baby felt familiar. His weak crying, his uneven breathing, the constant rejecting of formula. It reminded her too much of Elijah's early signs. It scared her enough to care. Maybe too much. She rubbed her cheek again and whispered to herself, "I need to quit." The thought came out steady, but her heart resisted immediately. Walk away. Don't go back. But the moment she imagined leaving Liam alone in that penthouse, her stomach twisted. She knew what she saw in his eyes. She knew what shutting down looked like. And she couldn't blame herself again for ignoring the signs. Not again. Not after Elijah. Meanwhile, across the city, Dominic stood in the nursery doorway long after Noelle left. He hadn't moved. He stared at Liam, sleeping peacefully, his chest rising and falling in soft, steady breaths. The same child who had been screaming weakly for days now looked like he had finally found relief. Dominic didn't understand it. He didn't understand anything anymore. How could the same woman he threw out be the reason his son could rest? He stepped closer to the crib and looked down at Liam's small body. The soft lighting warmed the baby's face, and for a moment, Dominic felt something tighten in his chest. Guilt crept in. Not guilt for the slap. Not yet. But guilt over the truth he could no longer deny. Noelle had done something he couldn't. She had gotten Liam to eat. Something he had failed at over and over. Something the doctors couldn't explain. Something that made him feel helpless as a father. He pushed that thought aside quickly, the way he always pushed aside anything that made him feel weak. Pride rose instead. Pride that protected him. Pride that kept him from acknowledging fear. Pride that told him he did the right thing by setting boundaries, by handling his home the way he saw fit. But then Marianne Hale entered the room. She didn't knock. She didn't pause. She walked in with the quiet confidence of a woman who had lived long enough to know when her son was lying to himself. Her eyes went straight to Liam, then slowly to Dominic. She didn't say a word at first. She simply studied him. Dominic cleared his throat, trying to look unaffected. "He's finally sleeping," he said. "She calmed him, I guess." Marianne stepped closer to the crib, brushing her fingers gently over Liam's blanket. "Sleeping after days of struggling," she said softly. "And tell me, Dominic, who made that happen?" He stiffened. "Mom, please. Don't start." "I'm not starting," she replied. Her voice was calm, almost disappointingly calm. "I'm stating the truth. You punished the only person who saved your child." Dominic looked away, jaw tightening. She crossed a line. Marianne turned to him fully. Her expression was sharp, but not cruel. The only line she crossed was stepping in when you didn't. You slapped a woman who fed your son because you were too proud to accept she did what you couldn't. Dominic swallowed hard, the words hitting him deeper than he expected. Marianne continued, her tone quiet but firm. "You don't have to like her. You don't have to trust her yet. But you owe her something you're not brave enough to give. The truth. She saved him. And you know it." Dominic's chest tightened again, this time with something heavier than pride. Something closer to shame. Marianne touched Liam's cheek and whispered, "This baby is alive tonight because of her." And the room fell silent. Marianne didn't stay long after delivering those words. She left Dominic alone with the weight of them, letting the silence settle the way only a mother knows how. But she didn't go home. She didn't return to her quiet townhouse on the Upper East Side. Instead, she called for her driver, gave him an address in Brooklyn, and sat back in the car with a thoughtful, almost troubled expression. Because while her son wrestled with pride and guilt, she had her own questions. Questions that didn't feel like they belonged in that penthouse with its polished floors and cold walls. Questions that needed answers from someone softer, someone honest, someone who had held her grandson with a kind of tenderness she hadn't seen since Serena died. Noelle was still sitting on her couch when the knock came. She hadn't moved much. Her cheek still throbbed, her thoughts still tangled, her heart still fragile. She wasn't expecting anyone. She didn't want anyone. But the knock came again, firm and steady, and something about it told her this wasn't a neighbor or a delivery. When she opened the door and saw Marianne Hale standing there, dressed in a simple coat with her hands gently clasped in front of her, Noelle froze. For a moment she didn't know whether to step back or step forward. "Noelle," Marianne said softly. "May I come in?" The older woman's tone wasn't cold. It wasn't demanding. It carried a quiet warmth, a kind of gentle invitation that made it hard to refuse. Noelle nodded and stepped aside, letting her in. She suddenly became aware of everything. The smallness of her apartment, the worn-out couch, the tiny kitchen barely big enough for one person, the picture of Elijah on the wall. She felt embarrassed, exposed. But Marianne looked around with calm eyes, not judgmental ones. "Thank you," Marianne said, settling onto the couch. "I hope this isn't an intrusion. I needed to speak with you." Noelle sat across from her, trying to hide the redness on her cheek. "I didn't expect you," she said gently. "I know," Marianne replied. "But I needed to see you. After what happened. After what my son did. I couldn't stay silent." She paused, letting her words breathe. "I'm not here to excuse him. I'm here to understand you." The room fell quiet again, soft and heavy. Noelle wasn't used to people asking her anything about herself. Most people saw the maid uniform and assumed they already knew her story. But Marianne waited, patient and sincere, giving her space to speak. "I used to be a NICU nurse," Noelle finally said. Her voice was steady but tired. I worked with premature babies. Sick babies. Babies who needed every second of care. She looked down at her hands, twisting them slowly. My son, Elijah. He passed 6 months ago. I was holding him when it happened. Mary Ann's expression softened. I'm so sorry. Noelle nodded, swallowing hard. After he died, I couldn't go back to the hospital. Everything there reminded me of him. The machines. The sounds. Even the smell. So I left. I took cleaning jobs. And when the agency sent me to the Hale penthouse, She stopped, her voice thinning. I don't know how to explain it. Something about Liam reminded me of the babies I used to watch over. Something about the way he cried. The way he would suddenly go still. I got scared. Mary Ann listened without interrupting. When Noelle finished, she reached out and placed a gentle hand over hers. You acted on instinct, she said softly. On a mother's instinct. And that is something you should never apologize for. She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. Serena, my daughter-in-law. She had been looking for someone before she passed. Someone who could help care for Liam. She said she wanted a woman with a mother's heart. Her words, not mine. Noelle blinked slowly, absorbing the meaning. She didn't know me. No, Mary Ann said. But she knew what she wanted for her child. And when I watched you holding Liam today, I realized something. She paused, her expression softening, almost saddened. Serena would have trusted you. I believe that with all my heart. Those words made Noelle's chest tighten in a way she didn't expect. She looked away, blinking back a wave of emotion she wasn't ready to face. Meanwhile, back at the penthouse, Dominic stood alone in the nursery. The apartment felt colder without Noelle's presence, without the soft lullabies she hummed, without the warmth she seemed to bring without even trying. Liam was still sleeping peacefully, but Dominic's thoughts refused to settle. Something felt off, something deeper than guilt or anger. Something that gnawed at him. For the first time since Serena died, he felt the need to understand what was happening in his own home. Not with business eyes. Not with pride. But with clarity. He walked over to the cabinet near the crib, opened it, and pulled out the old baby monitor Serena had insisted on keeping. He hadn't touched it in months. He didn't want reminders. But tonight felt different. Tonight, he needed truth more than comfort. He turned it on. The recordings loaded one by one, and as he scrolled through them, his chest tightened. Footage from the past few days showed Liam crying non-stop. Hours of crying. Weak, desperate crying. And then, nothing. Moments where the staff walked past him without picking him up. Bottles sitting on the counter unopened. A nanny scrolling through her phone, barely glancing at him. Dominic felt heat rising in his chest, anger, guilt, confusion all tangled into something sharp. Then he saw it. Noelle entering the room quietly. Noelle picking up Liam gently. Noelle humming to him. Noelle holding him close, comforting him with a tenderness that filled the whole screen. He watched the footage twice. Then a third time. She had been the only one paying attention. He left the nursery and marched toward the staff quarters with a purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. One by one, he questioned them. Not with yelling, but with cold, controlled precision that made each employee shift uncomfortably under his gaze. He noticed things he never cared to notice before. The way some staff rolled their eyes when he mentioned Noelle's name. The way they exchanged looks behind his back. The clipped tone they used when referring to her. Comments that sounded harmless on the surface but carried a quiet bitterness underneath. He felt something unpleasant settle in his stomach. Resentment. Bias. Jealousy. Quiet hostility disguised as professionalism. And then he found the formula bottles. Sitting by the sink, half prepared, watered down, expired. Some mixed incorrectly. Some not mixed at all. Everything clicked at once. Liam hadn't been rejecting food. He had been rejecting danger. And the only person who caught it was the woman he threw out. Dominic closed his eyes for a moment, breathing slowly, letting the truth sink in. Pride didn't help him now. Anger didn't help him either. Only truth did. Truth that he had ignored. Truth that Noelle had seen before anyone else. And for the first time since the slap, he finally whispered the words he had been avoiding. I was wrong. Dominic didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dim light of the kitchen, staring at the baby monitor, replaying the same moments over and over, each one carving a deeper crack in the wall he had built around himself. By dawn, the apartment was quiet except for Liam's soft breaths. The sky outside shifted from gray to pale blue, but Dominic didn't move from his seat. The weight of everything he had seen lived in his chest like a stone he couldn't swallow. As the morning light spread across the penthouse, his eyes drifted toward a door he hadn't opened in almost a year. Serena's office. Her private space. The one room he had closed after her funeral and left untouched, as if avoiding it could stop the grief from reaching him. But something inside him changed during the night. Something pushed by truth, pride stripped down, guilt screaming louder than his excuses. He stood slowly, walked toward the hallway, and placed a hand on the doorknob. The moment the door opened, the scent of her perfume washed over him. Soft. Floral. Familiar. It punched him straight in the chest, and for a few seconds, he had to stand still and breathe. Dust floated in the air. Papers lay untouched on the desk. Her favorite sweater still hung on the back of the chair. Everything was the same, exactly how she left it, as if she might return at any moment. Dominic stepped inside gently, almost afraid to disturb the air. He ran his fingers across her desk, feeling every indentation, every uneven surface, as if touching it brought her closer. And then his hand stopped on a small leather notebook. Serena's handwriting peeked out from between the pages, curved, neat letters he knew by heart. With careful fingers, he opened it. The first few pages were about Liam, feeding schedules, growth charts, small notes about his sleeping patterns. But further in, the writing shifted. A list appeared. Names. Addresses. A title above it. Potential caregivers. Dominic blinked. He had never seen this. He didn't even know she had been searching. He flipped the page, and the list continued. Some names were crossed out with notes beside them. Too impatient, not gentle, unreliable, cold energy. But halfway down the page, one name stopped him. Noelle Carter. Underlined. Dominic stared at it for a long moment. His throat tightened. His mind churned. He turned the page and saw Serena's brief notes beside the name. Met her at the clinic. NICU nurse. Patient. Calm. Warm. Steady eyes. Dominic frowned. Met her at the clinic? When? How? He kept reading. Lost her baby recently. Heartbreaking story. But something in her. Strength under the sadness. If anything happens to me, Dominic must meet her. She has the heart our son will need. The room felt colder suddenly. Dominic sat down heavily in Serena's old chair, staring at the words until they blurred. His chest tightened with something that felt like grief mixed with shock. He flipped to the back of the notebook, searching for more, desperate for something that could explain why Serena never told him any of this. That was when he noticed the envelope tucked into a slit at the very back cover. His name wasn't on it. Noelle's was. His hands trembled slightly as he slid the letter out. Serena's handwriting marked the front. For the woman with the steady eyes. Dominic hesitated before opening it. The paper inside was soft, almost delicate. Serena's handwriting flowed neatly across the page. If you are reading this, it means life has taken a turn I hoped it wouldn't. I don't know you well, but I saw something in you the day you held your baby at the clinic. A calm strength. A quiet courage. A softness that comes from knowing loss. If anything ever happens to me, please look after my son. You don't owe me anything, but I believe you will understand him in a way others won't. With honesty, patience, love. Protect him. Please. Dominic folded the letter slowly, pressing it against his chest. He closed his eyes, swallowing the wave of emotion rising inside him. It felt as if Serena was in the room again, her voice echoing through the walls, reminding him of every moment he failed to see what she saw. He wiped a hand across his face, but the pressure in his chest didn't ease. Instead, it grew, pushing him toward a truth he wasn't ready to face. While Dominic sat in Serena's chair drowning in memories and regrets, Noelle stood in front of her small bedroom closet, holding the one-made uniform she had left clean. She stared at it for a long moment, her thoughts drifting back and forth like a tide she couldn't control. Leaving felt right. It felt necessary. The slap, the humiliation, the way he looked at her, everything pointed her toward the door. She deserved better. She knew that. But the thought of Liam's weak cries tugged at her harder than her pride did. She knew what it looked like when a baby was fading. She had lived that nightmare once already. And despite everything, she couldn't shake the feeling that walking away would mean abandoning him at the worst possible time. She sighed, placing the uniform aside. She rehearsed what she would say when she returned just to resign. She didn't expect kindness. She didn't expect apology. She wanted closure, nothing more. A soft knock sounded at her door again. She opened it to see Marianne standing there for the second time that day, the same calm expression on her face. But this time, it carried urgency. "Noelle," Marianne said gently, "we need to talk." Noelle stepped aside, letting her in without question. She could tell by Marianne's eyes that this wasn't a social visit. This was something heavier. "I spoke with Dominic," Marianne said, lowering herself onto the couch. "And I need you to understand something. My son is proud. Too proud sometimes. But he's not blind to what he saw last night." Noelle remained standing, her hands clasped tightly. "Mrs. Hale, I don't want to cause trouble. I just want to leave quietly." Marianne shook her head. "Leaving is not an option right now. Whether you realize it or not, that child is tied to you in a way none of us expected." Noelle's breath caught. "I shouldn't stay where I'm not wanted." Marianne leaned forward, her eyes filled with a rare blend of strength and fear. "If you walk away, Liam may not survive this season." The words hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. Noelle felt her knees weaken, her throat tighten. She knew Marianne wasn't speaking out of panic. She was speaking out of truth. Truth Noelle had already sensed in the quiet corners of her heart. "Before she could respond," Marianne added, "Serena trusted you without knowing your name. And now that I've seen how Liam responds to you, I understand why." And as those words settled in the small room, both women realized the same thing. This story was no longer about a maid and a billionaire. It was about a child caught between life and loss, and the woman fate seemed determined to place at his side. Noelle didn't sleep after Marianne left. She sat on the edge of her bed with her head in her hands, trying to piece together what her heart wanted and what her dignity demanded. Her instinct told her to leave. Her pain told her to leave. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Liam's small face, pale and tired, and the image held her where she was. Sometimes your heart doesn't listen to logic. It listens to the part of you that remembers what loss feels like. And Noelle remembered it all too well. She didn't have long to sit with those thoughts. Late that afternoon, as she stepped outside to throw away a small bag of trash, she heard footsteps approaching fast behind her. When she turned, she saw Ashley, the youngest nanny from the Hale household, standing a few feet away, looking around as if she'd been followed. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes darted back and forth with a kind of fear that comes from carrying something too heavy for too long. "Noelle, I need to talk to you," Ashley whispered, pulling her hood lower as if hiding from shadows. Noelle's guard went up immediately. "Ashley, what are you doing here?" Ashley swallowed hard. "I shouldn't be here. If they find out, I'm done. But I can't stay quiet anymore." She paused, her voice trembling. "You need to know what's really been happening." Noelle didn't speak. She waited, steady and patient, letting Ashley gather whatever courage she had left. "It wasn't your imagination," Ashley said finally. "The staff. They were working against you." A small, sharp ache spread in Noelle's chest. She tried to keep her face calm. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Because you were too good," Ashley said, her voice cracking. "Because Liam liked you. Because you made us look bad without even trying. Every time he calmed down in your arms, every time he stopped crying when you held him, people noticed. And they didn't like it." Noelle felt her stomach drop. That's not a reason to hurt a child. Ashley shook her head quickly. No, no. They didn't mean to hurt him. Not on purpose. But they were jealous. They were scared you'd replace them. Some of them thought you were trying to show off. She hesitated again, her voice dropping lower. And some didn't like that you're black. The words stung, not because they were surprising, but because they confirmed something she had sensed from the very beginning. The looks, the whispers, the strange tension. She had ignored it because she didn't want to believe adults could act that petty around a newborn. Noelle asked slowly, "What exactly did they do?" Ashley wrung her fingers nervously. The bottles. They weren't mixed right. Sometimes the formula was watered down. Sometimes it was expired. Sometimes it wasn't warmed properly. And when Liam wouldn't eat, they blamed you. She looked away, ashamed. "I'm so sorry. I tried to speak up. But the head housekeeper told us to keep quiet. She said you were getting too comfortable. She said you needed to be put back in your place." A cold, heavy stillness settled around them. Noelle's voice trembled, but she kept her composure. "Ashley, that could have killed him." "I know." Tears filled Ashley's eyes. "I know. And that's why I came. I couldn't stay quiet. Not after what happened this morning." For a moment, Noelle couldn't speak. She felt everything all at once: anger, disbelief, heartbreak, fear. She pressed a hand over her chest, trying to steady the storm inside her. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "It took courage." Ashley nodded, wiping her eyes. "Please, don't tell them I came to you. I couldn't carry this anymore." When Ashley left, Noelle stood there for a long moment, staring at the sky as the weight of the truth pressed down on her. Liam hadn't been rejecting food out of stubbornness or illness. He had been rejecting danger. Danger caused by negligence, jealousy, prejudice. And she had walked into the middle of it without knowing the full picture. Back at the penthouse, Dominic was going through a storm of his own. After discovering the formula bottles earlier, he felt something deep in his gut, something ugly and difficult to face. But he needed the truth. All of it. So he spent the afternoon reviewing surveillance footage from the staff kitchen, the nursery, and the hallway monitors. Hours of video. Hours of careless hands, rushed preparation, eye-rolling, whispered comments he couldn't hear but didn't need subtitles to understand. And then he saw it clearly on one of the recordings. A bottle. Water running too long. Powder measured incorrectly. A dismissive shrug. A whispered laugh. Someone mouthing a phrase that made Dominic freeze the screen. "Let her fix it if she thinks she's so perfect." Dominic stared at the frame for almost a minute. His jaw clenched. His fist tightened. A cold pressure built in his chest, rising slowly, burning through the last pieces of denial he had held onto. He moved to the next video. And the next. And the next. Piece by piece, the truth formed a picture so clear it made his stomach twist. Liam hadn't been fed properly. Not once. Not by anyone except Noelle. He leaned back in his chair and pressed both hands against his forehead. His breath shook. He felt something dark and heavy inside him. Guilt he had been avoiding for days. It finally hit him all at once. He had punished the one person who protected his son from danger he didn't even know existed. He had hit the woman who noticed what he didn't. He had thrown out the only person who had acted out of pure instinct and not obligation. Dominic's breathing changed, slow but uneven. He looked toward the nursery door, where Liam slept, unaware of the chaos circling around him. The sight of his son, peaceful for the first time in days, hit him harder than any argument or accusation. He whispered to himself, almost painfully, "What have I done?" His pride couldn't protect him anymore. Not from this. Not from the truth. Not from the realization that everything he assumed about Noelle, her motives, her boundaries, her place, was wrong. Every assumption had been stained by the shadows of his grief. His anger. His fear. His need to be in control. And now the evidence sat in front of him, cold and undeniable. Liam had been failing because of the people he trusted. And he survived because of the woman he pushed away. Dominic stood up slowly, feeling the weight of each step as he moved back toward the nursery. He stood in the doorway again, just as he had the night before, but this time the anger was gone. This time he understood the danger his son had been in. And the danger he had put Noelle in by failing to see the truth sooner. He whispered again, softer this time, as if admitting it aloud made it real. I was wrong, and I need to fix this. He waited until morning before calling her. He told himself it was to give her space, but the truth was simpler. He didn't know how to speak without making things worse. When he finally dialed her number, the ring felt too loud in his ear. Noelle answered on the third ring, her voice quiet and guarded. He asked if he could see her. She hesitated long enough to make him feel the distance he had created, then said yes, but only for a few minutes. They met in the building lobby because she didn't want him in her apartment. He understood and hated that he understood. He stood there with his hands at his sides like a boy who had been sent to own what he did. He started with the words he should have led with days ago. He said he was sorry. Not for the house politics. Not for the ruined bottles or the staff. For the slap. For the way he spoke to her. For thinking the worst of her. For making her feel like she was less than the person who saved his child. She listened without interrupting, her eyes steady on his face, her body held still like someone bracing for something they have already felt. And when he was done, she didn't give him what he wanted. She told him she heard him. She told him she appreciated the apology. But she also said forgiveness wasn't a switch he could flip. Trust wasn't either. She said she couldn't step back into his home like nothing happened. Not after the way he looked at her. Not after the way he used his anger to make her small. He nodded and said he understood. She said, I don't think you do. But you can learn. He asked her why she did it. Not the clinical answer. The real one. She took a breath and told him plain. She told him her body still produced milk. She told him postpartum hormones don't obey grief. They don't stop because a child is gone. They slow. They linger. They ache. She told him she felt the pull when Liam cried. The kind of pull you only feel when your body remembers what it means to keep a baby alive. She said she didn't plan it. She didn't try to prove anything. She acted because the signs were all there. He was shutting down. He was going still. He needed help. She had it to give. He stood there, shaken by how simple and human it sounded when she said it. He realized how little he knew about her. He realized how much he had refused to know. He asked about Elijah. She looked away for a moment and told him the truth. 6 months since the infection took him. 6 months since the monitors went quiet. 6 months since she walked out of the only place she thought she belonged. He felt the room shift with those words. He felt his own pain meet hers in a strange and heavy place where neither could solve the other's loss. He told her he was sorry for her son. He meant it. Later that day, Marianne came to the penthouse with a thin folder she had kept hidden since Serena's funeral. She placed it on the dining table and slid it toward her son. She told him this was the part of the story he didn't want to see when grief made him too angry to look. Inside were notes, emails to lawyers, drafts of letters Serena never sent, names that led to other names. A small map of people on the family payroll who had made quiet problems disappear when they might have grown into public ones. Donations that erased stories. Closed doors that hid messes. Lawyers who knew which truths to bury, and where. Marianne said she had argued with Serena about digging into this, but the young woman wouldn't stop. She believed their son would grow up in a home that faced its own reflection. She believed a family with real power should tell the truth, not scrub it clean. Marianne said, she was braver than both of us. Dominic stared at the pages and felt his throat tighten. He had spent a year doing the opposite of what his wife died hoping he would do. He had kept the house quiet. He had kept the doors shut. He had silenced the one voice that did the right thing when it mattered. He didn't get time to sit with it. Near evening, the monitor blinked a soft alert. At first, it sounded routine, nothing to make the heart speed up. But when he leaned over the crib, he saw it. Liam's color was off. His cry came out thin and then faded. His body felt too warm and too limp at the same time. Dominic lifted him and felt a kind of fear he hadn't felt since the night Serena died. He called for the nanny. He called for the housekeeper. He called for anyone, as if more people in the room would make the baby stronger. They crowded the doorway with frozen faces and useless hands. He told them to get the car. He told them to call the doctor. His voice rose, then cracked, then fell apart. Liam's head lolled. His eyes fluttered without focus. The truth hit like a fist to the chest. This wasn't a child being fussy. This was a child crashing. He dialed Noelle without thinking. There was no pride left in the call. There was no posture. Just a father who had run out of time. She answered on the first ring, and he didn't waste a second. He told her the signs. He told her the color. He told her the weakness in his son's cry. She didn't ask permission. She said she was coming and hung up. She was at the door in minutes, hair pulled back, hands steady, eyes all business and heart. She didn't look at anyone when she entered. She went straight to the crib, lifted Liam with a kind of care that belongs to people who have done this in rooms colder than this one, with parents crying harder than he was. She moved through the steps without rushing, without panic. She checked his skin. She checked his gums. She checked his belly. She listened to his breath. She felt the pulse at his ankle with 2 fingers and closed her eyes for one long second like she was measuring more than beats. Then she gave clear, simple orders the room could finally follow. Cool the room by a few degrees. Boil water. Ready the oral syringe. Bring the clean towels. She mixed the oral rehydration in exact amounts and coaxed it in gently, slow, patient, the way you do when you know the line between too much and just enough. She kept him upright and stroked his back in soft circles. She hummed the same quiet tune she had hummed before, but this time it felt like a bridge pulling him back from the edge. After a tense few minutes that felt like an hour, Liam took a longer breath. Then another. His eyes opened a little more. His body held itself with a touch more strength. The room exhaled as one, but Noelle didn't relax yet. She watched him with that steady, measuring gaze that had once calmed a room full of machines. Only when his color improved did she look up at Dominic and say, "He's stabilizing. We're not out of it yet, but he's turning." Dominic felt his knees weaken. He sat down because he didn't trust his legs to hold him. He watched her hold his son and felt a kind of gratitude that hurt. It hurt because it was tied to shame. It hurt because it was tied to the memory of his hand across her face. It hurt because she had just saved his child again, and all he could think was that he had made himself her enemy when she had been nothing but his son's shield. He tried to speak, but the words came out broken. She didn't let him fill the air with apologies. "Not now," she said softly, eyes still on the baby. "Focus on him." Marianne stood at the doorway with her hand against the wall as if she needed the house to hold her steady. She watched Noelle work and saw the things Serena had tried to put into words. The difference between a caregiver who follows a task and a mother's heart that knows how to read a child without a chart. When the room was calm, she moved to Dominic's side and spoke low so only he could hear. She told him this was the moment he grew up as a father. Not the day Liam was born. Not the day he signed hospital forms. Today. The day he faced his pride and chose the person who could keep his son alive over the image he tried to protect. She told him to remember the folder on the table, and what it said about their name. She told him to remember Serena's notes, and what they said about Noelle. Then she said the one thing he would remember for the rest of his life. If you choose the truth, you'll keep your son. If you choose your pride, you'll lose them both. He swallowed hard and nodded. He watched Noelle's hands. He watched her calm. He watched his son return to himself breath by breath. The room had sound again, the soft hum of the air, the whisper of fabric, the tiny, almost not, their noises of a baby who was no longer slipping away. He tried to thank her, but what came out was smaller and more honest. He said, "I don't deserve this." She looked at him for the first time since she walked in and answered with a kind of tired mercy he didn't expect. "It's not about what you deserve. It's about what he needs." When it was safe to move Liam, she guided Dominic through the next steps. What to watch for, how often to give fluids, when to call, how to tell the difference between a dip and a fall. She wrote it all down in clean, simple lines and placed the note by the crib because she knew his mind was a storm. She started toward the door, and he stood to follow. He wanted to say more, but he held it back. She had given enough for one night. At the threshold, she paused and turned slightly. "I'll come if you call," she said. "But I won't come to be disrespected again." He nodded, and for once, he didn't try to fix the moment with words. He let the truth stand. When the door closed, he went back to the crib and rested his hand near his son's small fingers. He watched the gentle rise and fall of a body that had fought harder than it should have had to. He felt the shape of the day settle into one clear line he could not escape. She had saved his child twice. The first time he repaid her with anger. The second time he had nothing to offer but silence and the promise to be different. He looked toward the table where Serena's folder lay open and felt a steady resolve grow in his chest. The house would change. The staff would change. He would change. Not someday. Now. Because the child in the crib had finally slept, and the woman he had pushed away had proven, beyond any doubt, what Serena had written in her notes long before any of this began: find a woman with the steady eyes. She's the one who will protect our son. The house grew quiet after Noelle left that night, as if the walls themselves were exhausted. Dominic stayed in the nursery until the sun began to rise, watching Liam's breathing, watching the soft movements beneath the blanket, watching the small signs that meant the worst had passed. Marianne sat in the hallway with a cup of untouched tea, staring at the floor like someone who had lived long enough to know that truths never stay buried. They always find their way out. By morning, Dominic felt a clarity he hadn't felt in over a year. It wasn't peace. It wasn't forgiveness. It was simply the understanding that something in the house had to change, starting with him. When Noelle returned later that day to check on Liam, it wasn't because she was ready to forgive. It was because her heart refused to abandon a child she had already committed herself to. And Dominic knew better than to treat her presence as anything more than a responsibility she was choosing to carry. He didn't ask her to sit, but she did. He didn't ask her to stay, but she stayed long enough to confirm Liam was stabilizing. And when she finally straightened up to leave, he said quietly, "I need your help with something." She hesitated, her hand still resting gently on the crib rail. "With what?" He glanced toward the hallway that led to Serena's office, the room he had avoided for nearly a year. "There are things of hers I never went through. Things I should have looked at sooner. I want to understand what she left behind. I want you to come with me." For a moment, Noelle didn't answer. She looked at him in a way she hadn't before, not with anger, not with fear, not with forgiveness. With caution. But something in his voice, not pride, not demand, but grief, softened her resistance. She followed him. The room felt different this time. Less like a shrine, more like a story waiting to be read. Dominic walked straight to the desk, to the drawers he had never touched, to the cabinets he had pretended he had no reason to open. He didn't rush. He didn't force anything. He simply breathed and began. Noelle joined him on the floor when he opened the lowest drawer, where Serena kept old journals and unfinished letters. One by one they pulled out notebooks, papers, envelopes sealed and unsealed. Some were clearly drafts. Some were addressed to no one. Some were addressed to Dominic. Some to Liam. And then, under a stack of folded clothes, Noelle found a small jewelry box. Mahogany, with a delicate gold clasp, dust settled across the lid. She lifted the box carefully and placed it between them. Dominic froze. That was her grandmother's. "Is it locked?" Noelle asked. He nodded. "It needs a key." She kept it on a chain she wore, almost every day. Noelle lifted a hand slowly to her own neck, then stopped herself, realizing how personal this moment was for him. Dominic stepped forward and opened the drawer of Serena's vanity. Inside, beneath a few hair clips and an old perfume bottle, was the thin gold chain with a tiny key still attached. He returned to her, hands shaking slightly, and unlocked the box. Inside were letters. A stack of them, neatly tied with ribbon, dated across the last few months of Serena's life. Some were labeled, "To my son, when you are old enough. To my son, on your first heartbreak." The handwriting was soft, rounded, full of love. Noelle touched one envelope gently, imagining a mother writing to a future she wasn't sure she would reach. Underneath the letters for Liam were others, addressed to Dominic. He didn't reach for them. He looked at them the way a man looks at a wound he isn't ready to reopen. Noel whispered, "You don't have to read them today." But his hand moved anyway. Slowly, painfully. He took one envelope, the edges slightly frayed from being handled so many times while unwritten. He opened it with trembling fingers. Her words were simple. Raw. Written late at night, probably when Liam was asleep and the house was quiet. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to steady you. Grief will try to make you hard. Don't let it. Our son needs your softness more than your strength. He needs a father who listens, who asks for help, who doesn't let pride build a wall around him. Dominic swallowed, the words hitting deep. He blinked rapidly, trying to force the sting in his eyes into something calmer. Noel reached for another stack and found one envelope that made her pause. It had no address, no name, just a line written in Serena's familiar hand. For the woman with the steady eyes. Noel held her breath. Dominic looked confused at first, but then his expression changed. Recognition. Shock. Understanding. He gestured for her to open it. Noel unfolded the letter slowly. "You don't know me yet. But if you're reading this, then you stepped in where I feared no one would." Dominic closed his eyes. Noel continued reading silently for a moment before she spoke again. "Our son has a fragile heart. Not medically. Spiritually. He needs gentleness from people who see him for who he is. If life brings you into his world, please protect him. And if my husband loses his way, remind him he is more than his name." Noel's breath trembled. She felt the words move through her like a quiet certainty she didn't know she needed, a reminder that her instincts had been right from the start. Dominic lowered his head, pressing his palms over his face. His shoulders shook once. Then again. And again. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was something smaller and more painful, the sound of a man breaking in private after fighting himself for too long. But the past wasn't done with them yet. That afternoon, Dominic called a house meeting. The staff stepped into the living room with cautious eyes, some defensive, some indifferent. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't thunder. He simply played the footage, video after video showing the negligence, the laziness, the deliberate undermining of Noel's work. Whispers turned into silence. Some staff shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at the floor. He fired half the household. Immediately. No hesitations. No warnings. The head housekeeper, the one who orchestrated the sabotage, stood still, chin lifted, eyes cold as she slipped off her name badge and placed it on the table. As she turned to leave, she paused in the doorway and looked at Dominic with a bitterness that suggested she wasn't leaving quietly in her heart. "You think this is the worst of it," she said softly. "Your wife hid things from you. Things you don't want to uncover. You don't know the half of what she kept buried." And then she walked out, leaving the silence behind her, leaving the questions behind her, leaving Dominic and Noel staring at a house that suddenly felt bigger, darker, and filled with truths still waiting to surface. The house felt lighter after the staff meeting, but it wasn't peace. It was the quiet after a storm when you know another one might be forming somewhere you cannot see. Dominic stood at the window with the city spread below and tried to breathe like a man who had finally told the truth. Marianne sat with Liam in her arms, rocking him with that slow rhythm that calms both child and grandmother. Noel checked the notes by the crib, adjusted the room temperature, and made sure the formula was stored the right way. Small things. Necessary things. The things that keep a baby safe. The knock came just before noon. It wasn't a knock, really. It was 3 hard strikes that had more to do with power than manners. The door opened before anyone reached it. Judge Richard Wyndham stepped into the penthouse as if he owned the place, carrying the cold air in with him. His coat was still on. His jaw was set. His eyes went first to Dominic, then to Marianne, then to Noel. He didn't hide his disgust. "Get her out of this house," he said, pointing at Noel without even looking at her properly. "Right now." Marianne did not stand. She kept her seat, kept rocking Liam, and answered with quiet steel. "Lower your voice. The baby is sleeping." Richard turned to Dominic. "I warned you when you married my daughter that you weren't ready for responsibility. But this is beyond failure. You struck your staff. You struck a woman. And not just any woman, the one who claims to be feeding your child with her own body. Do you have any idea what this looks like?" Dominic stood taller, but he didn't fire back. "Not yet. You don't know what happened," he said. "And you don't get to storm in here and decide what happens to my son." Richard scoffed. "Your son. Serena carried that child. Serena planned for his care. Serena built a future you are burning down out of pride and grief. She is dead because you were careless with your time and your marriage. Don't you dare preach to me about who gets to protect this boy." Noelle didn't move. She kept a respectful distance but didn't leave the room. She stood by the crib, one hand on the railing, eyes on Liam. Not defiant. Not timid. Marianne watched Richard with a look that said she had seen men like him all her life. Men who confuse volume with truth. Richard jabbed a finger toward Noelle. "And you. I don't care what you've been told. You are a danger. You crossed lines no staff member crosses. You manipulated a grieving father. I will see to it you are removed from this house and that you never work near children again." Noelle met his gaze. Her voice was calm. "I kept your grandson alive." He laughed without humor. "What you did was insert yourself into a family that isn't yours. And if Dominic won't protect that child from you, I will. I'll file for emergency custody by the end of the day. I have judges who owe me favors. I'll have a guardian ad litem here by morning." Dominic's hands tightened at his sides. "You will not take my son." Richard stepped closer, which only made him look smaller next to the weight of the room's truth. "You hid a woman in your nursery. You kept negligent staff in this home. You failed to feed your child. This is not a fit father. And you," he glanced at Noelle again, "you are part of the problem." Marianne stood then, slow and steady, holding Liam against her shoulder. The room shifted around the simple act of a mother rising. "Richard, you lost a daughter. I will never use that against you. But you will not use her death to control this home." She nodded toward Noelle. "This woman saved him, twice. She stopped what your friends on the bench would call a near miss and what a mother calls a nightmare. Your anger is pointed at the wrong person." Richard bristled. "You think I don't know how this city works? You think I haven't cleaned up worse? You fire a few staff, play a few videos, present a tidy narrative of negligence, and suddenly you're saints? Please. You have no idea what I know about this house." Noelle looked to Dominic, then to the hallway that led to Serena's office. Something in Richard's choice of words struck her, not the threat itself, but the certainty beneath it. It matched the head housekeeper's parting shot. "You don't know the half of what your wife hid." A thought moved through her chest like a quiet alarm. She excused herself from the room and walked to the office while the voices edged higher in the living room. Richard kept pushing. "I will call my attorney. I will call the press if I have to. I will expose whatever needs exposing. Do not test me, Dominic." "You already are," Dominic said, voice calm but tight. "And it isn't working." Noelle opened the office door and moved to the desk with that same steady pace she used when a baby's vital signs flickered. She knelt beside the lower drawer Serena had used for drafts and opened it again. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for. She only knew that fear and power leave tracks when they move through a life. Her fingers brushed past notebooks and envelopes until she felt a stiff folder tucked flat against the wood. It had no label on the front. Inside were clipped articles, correspondences, and a set of typed notes with Serena's handwriting in the margins. The title at the top wasn't subtle. Wind Corp Judicial Fund. Off-record allocations. Noelle read just enough to know what it meant. Charity fronts. Quiet gifts. A small list of clerks placed in courts where decisions could be nudged. A foundation in Richard's name that balanced mercy on paper with leverage in private. Serena had started to connect dots. She had circled 2 names and underlined a date. A meeting. A planned conversation with a journalist. The last page had a line in Serena's hand. If I push this, I will make enemies I can't see. My father will be one of them. Noelle closed the folder and carried it back to the living room. She didn't set it on the table as if it were a threat. She held it against her side like a burden she didn't want but could no longer ignore. She waited for a break in the shouting that hadn't quite started. When she spoke, her voice was soft enough that everyone had to quiet down to hear it. Serena was preparing to expose you, she said to Richard. She didn't finish, but she started. I found notes in her office. The judge's face went still. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Frozen. Dominic stared at Noelle, then at the folder, then at Richard. What is she talking about? Richard tried to laugh it off, but the sound didn't land. Conspiracy nonsense. Serena was a bright girl with too much time on her hands at the end. She saw ghosts in every shadow. Marianne stepped forward. Show me. Noelle opened the folder and handed it to her. Marianne read the headers, then the marginal notes, then the circled names. She lifted her eyes slowly to Richard. Did you use Serena's grief to keep her quiet? Richard's voice sharpened. Watch your words. No, Marianne said. You watch yours. Dominic took the folder next. He didn't speak while he read. He didn't look at anyone. He turned page after page until he got to the last line in Serena's hand. Enemies I can't see. My father will be one of them. His breath left him in a small, broken way. Something in him collapsed, and the man who had held himself up with anger stood in the center of his living room and looked like a son who had lost his wife and found the truth too late to say thank you. Richard tried one more angle. Even if this garbage were true, what will you do with it? Ruin your son's grandfather? Drag him through the press. You will destroy his future to win a fight you can't win. Dominic closed the folder and looked up. His voice was quiet. His future depends on what we are willing to face today. Richard turned his fury back on Noelle. You put your hands where they didn't belong. You put yourself between a father and his child. You are the reason this family is falling apart. Noelle did not raise her voice. This family was falling apart before I arrived. I didn't cause it. I found a child who was slipping away and I held on. Marianne spoke next, and when she did, the room followed. Richard, you will not threaten custody. You will not smear the one person who has given this child a chance to grow. If you move against us, we will move back, with the truth. And if you force our hand, your name will meet these pages in a courtroom you do not control. Silence sat heavy between them. Richard wasn't used to losing ground. He adjusted his coat and lifted his chin. You think you've chosen the moral path, he said. What you've chosen is weakness. The law does not care for sentiment. Dominic shook his head. The law may not, but Liam will. He will feel whether his father stood up for the person who saved him or hid behind pride. Today I choose him. Richard looked like he might say more, then decided against it. He gave a tight, bitter smile that did not reach his eyes and turned for the door. This isn't over, he said, and left the way he came. Loud, uninvited, certain of his own reflection. The door shut. The room took a breath it had been holding. Marianne handed the folder back to Noelle, a small, respectful gesture that said more than thanks. Dominic stared at the place where Richard had stood and felt the line inside him settle. He had a choice to make every day from now on. His ego, or his son. He looked at Liam, then at Noelle, then at Serena's words in his mind. He didn't speak the decision out loud. He didn't need to. He crossed the room, rested a hand on the crib, and let the quiet finish it for him. The house stayed quiet after Judge Wyndham left, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the kind that settles over a place right after something breaks. Dominic remained standing by the window, one hand braced against the glass, breathing slowly as if afraid a sudden movement would collapse him. Marianne carried Liam to the nursery, humming softly so the child wouldn't absorb the tension still trembling in the air. Noelle stayed in the hallway, holding the folder Serena left behind. She didn't move for a long moment. She watched the man at the window, Not as an employer, not as the one who hurt her, not even as the father of the child she loved more than she meant to. She watched him as someone carrying a grief he didn't know how to name. When she finally stepped closer, she didn't speak right away. She waited until he lifted his head. "You should sit," she said quietly. He didn't argue. He followed her to the dining table, lowering himself into a chair with the heaviness of someone whose armor had finally cracked. Noelle set the folder down between them and rested her hands on the edge of the table, steady and patient. "You're shaking," she said gently. Dominic looked down at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "I'm fine." "You're not," she said. "And you don't have to pretend." He let out a breath that sounded more like surrender than admission. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, unexpectedly, Noelle did. "I haven't told you everything about Elijah," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I think it's time I do." Dominic lifted his eyes, surprised. No one touched that name without care. Noelle sat across from him, fingers interlaced, eyes focused on something far beyond the room. "The day Elijah died," she began, "I was on shift. 12-hour rotation. NICU was full. 2 emergency admissions had come in overnight. We were short-staffed, and everyone was stretched thin. I had gone 2 hours without checking his oxygen levels because another baby coded. And by the time I got back," her voice tightened, but she breathed through it. "The infection had spread faster than they predicted. He'd slipped into respiratory failure. I held him after they unplugged the monitors. I told myself I should have seen the signs sooner. I told myself that if I wasn't so tired, if I wasn't working so hard, I could have saved him." Dominic's breath caught. "Noelle, you can't blame yourself for that." She shook her head softly. "Grief doesn't care about logic. It picks a target and sits on your chest until you believe it. For me, the target was me." She stared down at her hands. When Liam cried the way Elijah cried, when his color changed the same way, I didn't think. I reacted. My body remembered what it felt like to lose a child. My hands remembered the weight. My heart remembered the silence that followed. Her voice trembled, just barely. I wasn't trying to replace him. I wasn't trying to cross lines. I was trying not to relive the worst moment of my life. Dominic leaned back, the words hitting him harder than he expected. The guilt he carried pressed down on his chest until he couldn't look at her. He ran a hand over his face and let out a breath that shook. "I need to tell you something too," he said. Noelle looked up, waiting. "When I slapped you," he said slowly, "I wasn't seeing you. I was seeing myself. My failures. My fear." He paused. "When I saw you feeding him, you didn't look ashamed. You didn't look hesitant. You looked strong. Calm. Exactly the way Serena used to look when she made decisions I didn't agree with but knew were right." Noelle listened, her expression open but guarded. "It made me feel small," he continued. "Weak. Like you were doing something I should have noticed myself. Like you were stepping into a role I wasn't filling. And instead of admitting that, I let the anger hit the closest thing in front of me." He swallowed. "It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. I don't expect forgiveness. I need you to know I've been carrying that shame every second since." The room stayed quiet long enough that it felt like time was holding its breath. Finally, Noelle nodded. "Thank you for saying it. It won't erase what happened. But it matters." Dominic lowered his head. "I meant what I told him. Liam comes first now. Not my pride. Not our name. Not the image my father-in-law wants to protect." As if summoned by the moment itself, Marianne returned with a small envelope in her hand. Her expression was unreadable. "I found this with the others," she said, setting it on the table gently. "It has both your names on it." "Both." Dominic and Noelle exchanged a look. He opened the envelope slowly. Serena's handwriting stretched across the page, gentle and steady. The letter was short, painfully short. "If you're reading this, then Richard has crossed a line I feared he would. He has tried to manipulate our marriage, interfered in decisions that were never his. He wants control over Liam the way he had control over me. Dominic's breath stalled. Serena's voice lived through the ink. Noelle, if fate ever brings you into Liam's life, trust your instincts, even if Dominic doubts you. Dominic, trust the person who puts Liam first, even when it isn't you. He closed his eyes. Noelle pressed her palm against her chest. Serena had seen the whole storm long before it arrived. Marianne looked at her son. This is enough to shut Richard down. But the storm wasn't done. The elevator dinged. Heavy footsteps approached. Richard reappeared in the doorway, expression sharp and vindictive. You think a few letters will save you, he snapped. You think you can threaten me? Dominic stood slowly, something firm and steady settling into his posture, something Serena must have hoped he would grow into. You manipulated my wife, he said. You tried to sway my marriage. You used fear to control her. But you will not control my son. Richard's eyes narrowed. This is the fight you want. Dominic stepped forward. No. But it's the fight I'll finish. Richard pointed a finger at him. Then prepare yourself. I will take you to court. I will take custody. I will destroy your credibility. Dominic didn't blink. Then bring everything you have. Because the truth will stand longer than your threats. Noelle watched the two men, one rooted in fear and ego, the other finally rooted in something steadier. And for the first time since she stepped into the Hale home, she realized Dominic wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for his son. They gathered in the living room just after sunset. The house felt different, lighter in some places, still tense in others. Dominic stood near the window with the city behind him and took a slow breath before speaking. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He simply looked at the people who remained and told them what was going to happen from now on. Noelle would return. Not as a maid. Not as a temporary fix. She would be reinstated and placed in charge of Liam's medical and emotional care. She would set feeding schedules, approve bottles, choose replacements for staff who worked closest to the baby, and make the final call when the room grew uncertain. He said her title clearly so there would be no confusion later. Household child guardian. He said those words like a promise and a line. Then he added one more. She would have a suite in the penthouse, next to the nursery, with private access to keep night care calm and focused. The message was simple. This is her role. This is her authority. We will protect it. There were nods around the room. A few stiff faces. One or two eyes that dared him to backtrack. He did not. Marianne watched from the corner with Liam in her arms and felt something settle in her chest, like a door had finally opened in a house that had been stale for too long. When the meeting ended, the staff returned to their work with a quiet that was not fear, but attention. People were watching themselves more closely now. They were moving with care. The house was learning how to breathe again. The next wave came fast. Richard filed for emergency guardianship the following morning. He claimed Dominic was unfit. He claimed the home was unstable. He called Noelle a danger and used the slap like a weapon he would swing until the handle broke. Papers were served at the door before breakfast. Dominic read them once, then read them again, then set them down and looked at his son. He didn't rant. He didn't spiral. He called his attorney, gathered his documents, and placed Serena's letters in a neat stack at the center of the folder. He included the note addressed to the woman with the steady eyes. He included the page that told him to trust the person who put Liam first, even when it wasn't him. He added the staff footage and the logs Noelle had begun to keep. Temperatures, intake, subtle changes in color, small notes that meant nothing alone but everything together. Truth has a shape when you write it down. He wanted the court to see it. The hearing took place 2 days later in a quiet courtroom with beige walls and tired chairs. No cameras. No noise. Just the low hum of a system that can be cold or kind depending on who walks in holding what. Richard arrived with a confident smile and a team that moved like a shadow behind him. Dominic arrived with Marianne and Noelle. He carried the folder himself. He held Liam's picture in the side pocket. When the judge asked for opening remarks, Richard spoke for 10 full minutes. He listed failures. He repeated the slap. He said the home was in chaos. He painted Noelle as a manipulator who forced her way into a family's grief. He spoke about reputation, safety, influence. He made himself sound like order. Dominic did not match his tone. He did not try to win with volume. He handed the judge Serena's letters first. The ones to Liam. The ones to him. The one to Noelle. He explained the sequence in a clear, steady voice. He played the footage of staff negligence and the watered-down formula. He presented the house logs and the feeding plan that had stabilized his son. He told the truth about the slap and did not defend it. He looked at Noelle and said, in the same courtroom air everyone was breathing, that he was ashamed of that moment and the way he had treated her before it. He said she saved Liam twice and probably a third time if you counted how many nights she had watched him when the house wasn't watching itself. He was not dramatic. He was exact. Noelle spoke only when the judge asked. She did not tell the courtroom her whole life. She did not ask for sympathy. She said what mattered to the case. She explained postpartum lactation and why her body still produced milk after Elijah's death. She described the signs of dehydration and the small shifts that warn a trained eye when a baby is heading toward a fall. She described how formula should be mixed and stored. She kept everything simple, respectful, and focused on Liam. When the judge asked why she stayed after being hurt, she said because the child needed her, and because there are moments when your pain has to wait. The judge nodded once and wrote something down. Richard tried to attack the letters. He called them sentimental. He said grief blurs judgment. He said Serena wanted the best for her child, not a stranger with a sad story. He used words that had weight but no warmth. Then he made a mistake. He questioned the authenticity of the note addressed to the woman with the steady eyes. He said Serena wouldn't write like that. Marianne asked permission to speak and told the judge, calmly, that she had watched Serena pick that phrase up and carry it through the last months of her life. The judge accepted the letters into the record. The ruling came at the end of the second day. The judge spoke slowly. She said the court's duty was to the child's safety and well-being above all. She said evidence showed a pattern of negligence among staff that had been corrected. She said the incident with the slap was serious, but the father's actions since then demonstrated accountability and change, and most importantly, compliance with medical guidance to protect the child. She said Noelle's role had been necessary, effective, and in alignment with the mother's documented wishes. She recognized Noelle as essential to Liam's care plan and approved her formal position in the home with clear authority over feeding and daily health routines. The petition for guardianship was denied. The room exhaled. Not loudly. Not with cheers. With relief that shows up as silence because everyone is too tired to do anything else. Richard stood without looking at any of them and left through the side door with his team. Marianne closed her eyes for a moment and pressed her fingers to her lips. Dominic stared at the desk until he could trust his face to move. Then he stood. He asked the court for a moment. He turned to Noelle, right there in the same room where his worst version of himself had been used against him, and he apologized again. Not in private. Not as a whisper of a man asking for mercy. He said it in the way a father does when he knows the apology isn't for him. It's for the child watching the world he will grow up in. He said he was sorry for the slap, for the disrespect, for the blindness. He said he would spend the rest of Liam's life proving he understood what she had done and what she meant. He did not ask for forgiveness. He asked for a beginning. Noelle held his gaze for a long second. The room was very quiet. She nodded once. "This isn't forgiveness," she said. "This is a beginning." The judge recorded the outcome and asked counsel to draft the order. Paper moved. People moved. The day moved on. At home, the suite next to the nursery was ready by the time the sun dipped behind the buildings. A small couch. A clean desk. A framed photo of a beach at dusk that Marianne had taken years ago and never found the right wall for. Noelle put two things on the bedside table before she unpacked anything else. Elijah's folded blanket and Serena's letter with a line she had read a dozen times by now. "You stepped in where I feared no one would." She touched both lightly and stood for a long moment, listening to the quiet hum that meant a house was finally steady. Liam's first steps came 3 months later on a soft afternoon that didn't ask for attention. He had been pulling himself up on the crib rail for days, testing his balance, letting out small, surprised laughs whenever his legs held a little longer than the last attempt. Noelle was on the rug with 2 blocks in her hand. Dominic knelt a few feet away with his palms open, whispering, "You've got it, little man, just one more." Marianne stood in the doorway with her breath caught in that sweet way grandmothers have when they know a family memory is about to be made. He lifted 1 foot, then the other. Wobbly. Brave. He took 3 steps toward Noelle and fell into her hands, giggling with pride that belonged to the room as much as to him. She held him close and laughed, eyes bright in a way that held both joy and ache. Dominic let out a sound he didn't bother to hide. Marianne pressed a hand to her chest and wiped a tear with the other. No one said anything big. No speeches. No grand words. Just the small things that matter. Good job. Look at you. You did it. Then Liam turned, reached for Dominic, and took 2 more steps, as if to say the space between all of them was smaller now. Dominic lifted him, kissed his hair, and let his eyes rest on Noelle over the boy's shoulder. He didn't need to speak for her to hear the message. "Thank you, stay, we are not the same people we were." Marianne stepped closer and lowered her voice to a whisper that carried only to the 2 of them. "She was meant to be here," she said, and it felt less like a comment and more like the truth the house had been trying to tell them from the start. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, a family learned how to stand. And when the child laughed again, the sound filled every empty place that had once held fear. Before you go, if this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you that family isn't always born, sometimes it's found, then take a moment to support this channel. Your likes, your comments, your subscriptions, they truly help these stories reach more people who need them. And if you want more deep, emotional tales like this one, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Tell me in the comments, who do you think truly saved this family, and why? I'll be reading every response. Top of form.